What you're looking at right now is $14,000 worth of hand-selected woodworking tools, custom-built cabinetry, and 20 years of craftsmanship completely destroyed. Not by a hurricane, not by a pipe burst, by the HOA. Their negligence, their broken drainage system, their arrogance. And when I knocked on their door asking for accountability, they laughed at me. They literally laughed. So I had a choice to walk away and eat a $14,000 loss, or make sure they understood exactly what it feels like when water goes where it's not supposed to go. I chose option 2, and by the time I was done, their pristine, perfectly manicured, members-only golf course looked like the Louisiana Bayou after Category 4. Stay with me, because this is the story of how one HOA's incompetence started the greatest neighbor war this subdivision has ever seen, and how I won. For anyone who's new to the channel, welcome to Neighbor Wars HQ, where we document real stories of HOA overreach, neighborhood power trips, and ordinary people who decided enough was enough. I'm your host, and today's story is personal. This one happened to me. Let me paint you a picture. I live in a mid-sized planned community in the southeast, one of those developments where every house looks basically the same, the grass is maintained to a specific height by covenant, and the HOA board operates like a shadow government with a laminated badge and too much free time. You know the type. About 11 years ago, I converted the back half of my 2-car garage into a fully functioning woodworking workshop. We're talking about a saw-stop table saw, a Powermatic joiner, a 15-inch planer, a dedicated dust collection system with a cyclone separator, a hand tool wall that took me 4 years to cure it, and workbenches I built myself from reclaimed white oak. This was not a hobby corner. This was a serious, professional-grade workspace. My sanctuary, the place I went after, worked to decompress, create, and build things that lasted. The drainage system along our shared property boundary, the one that runs between my lot and the HOA-maintained green space that borders the golf course, have been showing signs of failure for 3 years. I know this because I reported it 3 times. 3 documented, written complaints to the HOA board, each with photographs, each time-stamped, each submitted through their official online portal. The responses range from, "We'll look into it," to complete silence. After my 3rd complaint, the HOA president, a retired regional manager type who seemed to genuinely enjoy the power, sent me a form letter telling me the drainage infrastructure was functioning within acceptable parameters. That phrase would come back to haunt him. Then came the storm. It wasn't even a particularly historic storm, maybe 3.5 inches of rain over 6 hours. Not unusual for our region. But because that drainage line had been silently failing for years, when the water had nowhere to go, it found the path of least resistance, which, thanks to a slight grade in my backyard, was directly into the lower foundation vent of my garage workshop. I woke up at 2 a.m. to a sound I still can't quite describe. A kind of low, wet rushing. I walked into the garage and stepped into 4 inches of standing water. My saw stop is gone. My Powermatic joiner seized. Hand tools rusted before I could even dry them off. Lumber warped beyond use. A humidifier I used for climate control had shorted out and was sparking against the water. It was a nightmare. An absolute nightmare. The total loss, after everything was documented and photographed and assessed by a contractor friend, $14,200. Not counting sentimental value. Not counting the 11 years of careful collection. Just the replacement cost of the physical items. The next morning, I went to the HOA office before they even officially opened. I had a folder. I had my 3 previous complaints printed out with timestamps. I had photos of the failed drainage junction. I had photos of my destroyed workshop. And I had a very clear, very calm ask. I want the HOA to take responsibility for the damage caused by infrastructure they were repeatedly warned about and failed to maintain. The HOA president looked at my folder, looked at me, and said, and I am quoting directly from memory, "Homeowners are responsible for their own structures." The drainage system performed to community standard during a high precipitation event. He then slid my folder back across the desk. I told him I had a lawyer. He told me to have a nice day. Now, I want to be real with you here. The legal route was going to be long, expensive, and uncertain. HOA bylaws in most states give these organizations enormous cover, especially when they can argue that weather events are acts of nature. My attorney reviewed the case and gave me a 50-50 shot at recovering damages in small claims or civil court, and even that would take 12 to 18 months. I filed the complaint anyway because documentation matters. But I wasn't going to wait 18 months to feel like justice existed in the universe. That's when I started thinking about water, specifically where it goes when it has nowhere else to be. I want to be very clear about something before I get into this part of the story. Everything I did was on my own property, within my own property lines, using publicly available methods, and reviewed by both my attorney and a licensed civil engineer I hired for a consultation. I'm not advising anyone to do anything illegal. I'm telling you what I did on my own land within the law and why it worked. Here's the geography of the situation. My backyard backs up to a HOA maintained green space buffer, which then borders the eastern edge of the community golf course, specifically the fairway of hole 7, which is a gentle par, for that runs through a natural low point in the terrain. The golf course is a source of enormous pride for the HOA board. It's mentioned in literally every newsletter. The president plays it 3 times a week. It is their crown jewel. My backyard, I discovered after hiring that civil engineer, sits at a natural high point relative to the green space buffer, meaning water that falls on my property has always been draining toward that buffer. The HOA's broken drainage line had just been rerouting it wrong toward my foundation instead of through the proper outlet. The civil engineer's report was illuminating. It showed that the HOA's drainage infrastructure, as built, was actually supposed to carry water from my side of the buffer through the green space and into a retention pond on the far side of the golf course. That system had partially collapsed, which is why water backed up into my garage. But this is the key insight. With the right surface grading adjustments on my own property, I could restore the natural flow pattern and redirect water toward the green space buffer in a way that was entirely consistent with the original drainage design intent. In other words, I could legally, on my own property, restore the water to where the engineer said it was always supposed to go, which was straight through that green space buffer and directly into the lowest point of hole 7's fairway. I hired a landscaping crew. We spent a weekend grading the back 15 feet of my property, perfectly legal, no permits required for minor grading on your own lot in my municipality. We created a very gentle, very deliberate swale that channeled surface runoff toward the back fence line. Then I planted native water-tolerant vegetation along the swale, which any HOA compliance officer will tell you is actually encouraged in our community guidelines for erosion control. I did not touch the HOA property. I did not modify HOA infrastructure. I simply let my water go where the engineer said it was designed to go. The first notable rain came about 3 weeks after the grading was completed. It was a modest event, maybe 1.5 inches. I have a security camera that covers the back of my yard and, by extension, the edge of the green space. I watched the footage the next morning with a cup of coffee. The water moved exactly where the engineer predicted, through my swale, under the fence line, across the green space buffer, and pooled at the low point of the golf course fairway. By the next afternoon, hole 7 had a feature it had never had before, a beautiful, glistening, roughly 30-foot diameter water feature right in the middle of the fairway. The HOA's emergency maintenance crew was out there within 48 hours with pumps. They pumped it dry. Problem solved, they thought. Then it rained again. By the third rain event, hole 7 was consistently holding water for 3 to 5 days after any precipitation. The grass in the low point began to die. A light stand of cattails took root along one edge native species, naturally occurring, completely uncontrollable by any HOA bylaw. A family of mallard ducks discovered the new pond and took up residence. The golf course, which had been hosting member tournaments and charging green fees, was now forced to mark hole 7 as a ground under repair, a golf term meaning unplayable. The HOA newsletter that month, which I received as a dues-paying member, contained an urgent call to action about unexpected drainage challenges affecting our recreational amenity. There was no mention of my workshop. There was no mention of their broken drainage infrastructure. There was, however, an emergency board meeting announced. I attended. The community room was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Apparently, when the golf course floods, the retirees mobilize. There were easily 90 people in that room, and the mood was, let's say, energized. Golf is serious business in a planned community. People pay HOA dues in part specifically to maintain that golf course. And now Hole 7 was a duck pond. The board opened with a presentation about drainage challenges and infrastructure investment timelines. Big words, lots of slides. I sat in the third row with my folder. When public comment opened, I walked to the microphone. I introduced myself. I told them my name, my address, and my lot number. Then I placed it on the table where I had brought a portable projector and asked to use the screen, which they were legally required to permit for member comments on my civil engineer's report. I walked the room through the original drainage design. I showed them the failure point. I showed them my 3 submitted complaints with their timestamps. I showed them the form letter response, calling the system functioning within acceptable parameters. And then I showed them what $14,200 in destroyed workshop equipment looks like. The room got very quiet. I then explained, calmly, professionally, and with the slightly detached tone of someone who has rehearsed this 11 times in their bathroom mirror, that the water currently residing on Hole 7's fairway was, according to the original engineer's drainage design, exactly where it was supposed to be going all along. I had simply, on my own property, restored the natural drainage grade that the HOA's failed infrastructure had been improperly redirecting toward my workshop for years. I told them I would be happy to work cooperatively on a permanent solution. I told them my attorney's contact information was in the folder. And I told them that if the board wanted Hole 7 back, they might want to start the conversation with a check. The HOA president turned a color I don't have a name for. I won't give you every detail of the negotiation because, honestly, the back and forth lasted about 6 weeks and involved more emails than I care to relive. But here is the summary of what the HOA ultimately agreed to in writing, signed by the board. Full replacement cost for the workshop damage $14,200. A formal acknowledgement that the HOA drainage infrastructure had failed and that my complaints had been on record. A commitment to full drainage rehabilitation along the shared boundary, completed within 90 days with a third-party inspector. A reduction in my HOA dues for 24 months as additional compensation for what they called inconvenience. And a personal apology letter from the board president, which he clearly wrote under legal advice, but which I framed anyway. Hole 7 was fully restored about 4 months after the settlement. The cattails were removed. The grass was resodded. The ducks moved on, presumably to a better offer somewhere else. My workshop has been rebuilt. Better than before. Actually, because the settlement covered everything, I was able to upgrade a few pieces I've been putting off. The saw stop has a new dado set. The Powermatic is running again. The hand tool wall is back. And I added a French cleat system that I've been planning for years. Here's what I want you to take away from this. HOAs are not governments. They're not courts. They are contracted service providers for your community, bound by bylaws, state law, and whether they like it or not, basic principles of negligence and property rights. They count on homeowners not. Knowing this, they count on you being too tired, too intimidated, or too uncertain to push back. Document everything. Date everything. Get an engineer. Get an attorney consultation. Most offer free 30-minute calls. And understand that if you've tried the right channels and been dismissed, you are not powerless. You just have to be smarter, more patient, and more persistent than they expect. And if water happens to find its way to where it was always supposed to go, well, that's just gravity doing what gravity does. If this video resonated with you, if you've dealt with HOA overreach, bad neighbors, property disputes, or you just love a well-earned justice arc, hit that subscribe button right now. We drop new neighbor war stories every single week. Drop your HOA horror story in the comments below. I read every single one, and the best ones become future episodes. Give this video a thumbs up if you think I handled this right. And if you think I was wrong, tell me that too, because this community doesn't just want validation, we want the real conversation. I'm your host. This is Neighbor Wars HQ, and I'll see you in the next war.